Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the binge eating behavior, which is part of the binge eating disorder and also bulimia nervosa, to see whether we could consider this behavior as an addiction or not. And also let me know in a comment section whether you came across terms such as food addiction or obsessive overeating. One of the reasons why it might be really helpful to explore this topic is that once we determine whether binge eating is an addiction or not, that will then determine the treatment plan. Types of treatments that we offer to people who are addicted, for instance, to alcohol or drugs, is very specific and it's very different to the mainstream CBT, the cognitive behavior therapy for eating disorder. I'm sure you've heard many people saying that they're addicted to watching TV, maybe playing games, maybe they're addicted to a person, maybe they're addicted to drinking coffee. And sometimes it seems that any behavior that is repetitive we call addiction, but is it actually enough to call that the actual addiction? People who support the opinion that binge eating is an addiction, they point out a few similarities between binge eating and, for instance, drug or alcohol addictions. So first of all, in both cases, so in case of binge eating and, for instance, alcohol addiction, we have cravings, we have urges, and there's also a sense of loss of control. Also, people report that in both cases, so whether it is binge eating or, for instance, the drug addiction, in both cases there's obsessive component to them. That means that they constantly think about, let's say, drinking alcohol or eating and planning when they're gonna eat, when they're gonna drink. And also in both cases, people very often, they use, for instance, food or, let's say, alcohol to numb their painful emotions. Another similarity between, for instance, binge eating and alcohol addiction is that people very often, they deny the severity of the issue, and that then prevents them from recovering and asking for help. And this is then linked as well to secrecy, which is common in both cases, and it might be linked, for instance, to shame. What is also common in both instances is that people, they try to stop, and before they actually reach out for help, before they ask for professional support, they try many times themselves to stop, whether it is the addiction or the binge eating, but they fail on many occasions. Additionally, in both cases, there are detrimental effects on the body. However, these are not good enough to prevent the person or to help them stop the addiction or the binge eating. As you can see, there are many similarities between binge eating and an addiction, but is it actually enough for us to determine that binge eating, it is an addictive behavior and we should deal with it, we should treat it same as we would maybe treat alcohol addiction? As Dr. Christopher Thorburn, he said in his book about binge eating, there are three main distinctive differences between binge eating behavior and addictive behavior or substance misuse. So the first one, it is that people who binge, they are mainly concerned with the amount of the food that they're gonna eat. The type of food that they're gonna eat is not the main concern. And I know normally we say that people who binge, they normally binge on unhealthy food, which is high in sugar, which is highly processed, high in fat. But if someone has urge to eat, if they're not gonna have food which is high in sugar, they're gonna binge on whatever is available. The second main difference between the binge eating and addictive behavior is that people who binge, they constantly resist the urges. So they will go on different diets, they will restrict certain foods from the diet, they will maybe use starvation. So a few days after they've binged, they might just promise themselves that they're not gonna eat anything. And that doesn't obviously happen with the alcohol addiction or maybe drug addiction. And also what is related to the resistance of urges in binge eating is that people, they will experience a lot of stress because maybe they're unable to resist the urges, and also because of the fear of putting on weight. In contrast, the people who are addicted to drugs or alcohol, they don't have those urges to resist their addiction. So this is perhaps where the treatment for addiction might be failing the binge eating behavior. One of the first goals of addiction treatment is to help the person develop that urge, that desire for them to stop whatever addiction they have. On the other hand, the strong desire to avoid eating, to control eating, is actually perpetuating the binge eating behavior, because the more the person is trying to restrict certain foods from their diet, the more they use starvation. That then creates that mindset of scarcity, and that's what then actually is driving people to binge more and more. So lastly, people who are binge eating are terrified of their urges, they're terrified of their behavior of binging. And then to compensate, they maybe go on diets, they use laxatives, maybe they vomit. And this is because they're terrified of putting on weight or changing shape. But as I said before, those behaviors, they are then driving the eating disorder, they perpetuating the problem. In contrast, when someone is addicted to drugs or alcohol, the issues are not being perpetuated, or their addiction is not being perpetuated by the desire of wanting to stop the addiction. So now, on one hand, when we help someone with the binge eating behavior, we help them with the drive to control the food intake. On the other hand, when we help someone who's struggling with the drug or alcohol addiction, we help them to actually develop this drive to actually resist the urge to drink or take drugs. So even if we decide that binge eating is not an addiction, and even if we see that there's so many characteristics of binge eating that actually overlap with addiction, is it actually all right to use this 12-step addiction recovery model to deal with binge eating? I will take you now through 4 points that Dr. Christopher Fairburn he talks about, where he points out the differences between the 12-step approach to addiction and the CBT approach to deal with binge eating. And also, just to add, the CBT approach to binge eating is considered the most effective approach to deal with binge eating. First of all, the 12-step binge eating approach tells us that binge eating is a progressive illness that gets even worse when the person is able to resist the urge to binge. On the other hand, the CBT approach is much more hopeful, and we also have research to back up the CBT approach, telling us that the full recovery from binge eating behavior is possible, and people who cannot make the full recovery, they can still make a significant improvement in their condition. Secondly, Dr. Christopher Fairburn, he also talks about the fact that the 12-step approach to binge eating promotes the immediate abandonment of binging, and even the group pressure could be used to motivate people to instantly stop binging. On the other hand, the CBT has much more flexible approach and acknowledges individual differences and needs, first of all, that potentially actually standing on a way for the person to stop the binge eating behavior. The third point that Dr. Christopher Fairburn talks about is that the 12-step approach to binge eating actually encourages people to eliminate from their diet certain foods that potentially could be maybe triggering their binges. On the other hand, CBT takes a completely different approach. As I've already mentioned before, we actually have a research telling us that eliminating or trying to avoid certain food from the diet can actually trigger a person to binge more. Because when the person is trying really hard to avoid eating certain foods, then that might then create this obsessional thinking about the food that they cannot eat, that they restrict themselves from eating, and that eventually will lead them to actually binge on the same food that they tried really hard not to eat. So that's why the CBT approach is actually encouraging people to don't restrict their diets and don't eliminate certain foods from the diet. And the last point that Dr. Christopher Thurburn is mentioning in his book is that the 12-step recovery from binge eating is actually encouraging the white or black way of thinking. So they're gonna be things like this food is dangerous, this food is safe, you are in control or you are not in control, you're binging or you're not binging. On the other hand, CBT takes completely different stance. So we actually help people to don't fall into the pattern of black and white way of thinking. And the reason for that is when someone, for instance, will have a bar of chocolate, they might start catastrophizing about it, thinking like, oh, I had this bar of chocolate, I failed, it's all ended, all my hard work, it goes into nothing, and then they will feel really distressed. They might have another bar of chocolate, and then they will start binging. Where if we introduce this more balanced way of thinking, that will actually help the person to see it from different perspectives. So they might think like, oh, this is part of, you know, my recovery. This is maybe just a relapse, which is all right. I had a bar of chocolate. Maybe it's not that great for my health, but that doesn't mean I had a binge. So if we prevent the person from catastrophizing, that means as well that they are experiencing less stress. And then because of that, that potentially then can help them to actually avoid start binging again. And obviously the 12-step recovery from binge eating has also its positive aspects, such as having the sense of belonging, because there's a group of people with whom you can share your difficulties. There's also the ongoing and long-term support that with CBT possibly is very limited. So what is important to know that this 12-step approach to dealing with binge eating as if that was an addiction can be helpful to some people, definitely. But if it is effective enough to help majority of people who are struggling with binge eating, we don't know about it because there's lack of research within this area. On the other hand, with CBT, we have research that actually tells us how effective the treatment is and tells us that people, they can actually fully recover from binge eating. And like I said before, many people who cannot fully recover, they can make a significant improvement in their condition. Let me know in the comment section what type of treatment did you access to deal with your binge eating and what was your experience. And that will be it for today. And if you enjoyed this video, then please like it, subscribe, and I'm gonna see you next week then. Thank you. Bye bye.